This is Toby Rogers. He's better known by the cruel nickname Ticci Toby, which is what the kids at school called him. Why? Because he suffered from Tourette's syndrome. It caused him to tick and twitch in ways he couldn't control, which included violently cracking his neck often. He was also born with an extremely rare medical condition, which meant that he couldn't feel any physical pain. He was once in a car crash which resulted in the death of his sister. Toby managed to survive the crash with only a few minor cuts to his face and several more severe cuts to his right arm. Toby felt nothing. One day, Toby arrived home with his mum and was greeted by his dad waiting for them in the driveway. Toby despised his violent and alcoholic father. He didn't even visit the hospital before Lyra died after the crash. He was too drunk to drive. After a brief and awkward exchange, Toby went upstairs to his room. Whilst looking out of the window, he thought he saw something briefly move in the corner of his eye. There was nothing there. Must have been my imagination, he thought. After dinner, Toby went to bed and dreamt only of the car crash. He woke up many times crying before he eventually gave up trying to get to sleep and just got up. As he stared out of the window at the pine trees over the road, he noticed a figure stood under the streetlight. The tall figure was not much shorter than the streetlight, had extremely long limbs and had no eyes, nose or mouth. Toby heard a ringing in his ears which grew louder and louder until eventually everything went black. He woke up the next morning and felt completely void of any tiredness or fatigue. After stumbling downstairs, he was dizzy when he stood up. He ignored his mother's greeting as he felt he was on autopilot. He didn't feel in control of his actions. After that, he rarely left his room. He would often chew his hands and fingers until they bled. His mother once caught him doing this and quickly wrapped his hands in bandages. Toby then slowly started to lose his mind and was eventually taken to see a mental health professional. Whilst answering questions, he peered out the window and again saw the tall, faceless figure. That night in bed, Toby heard footsteps approaching down the hall. His door was open, but it slammed in his face. Toby called for his mum but got no reply. All he could hear was a child giggling and small feet running away. The door slammed behind him, and as he turned round, he saw his dead sister Lyra. As he backed up in fear, he bumped into something. He looked up to see the tall, faceless figure looming over him. Behind it were several young children who were bleeding out of their eye sockets. Then everything went black, and he woke up the next day thinking it must have been a dream. He left his room and noticed his father alone in the living room. He heard voices saying, do it, kill him, kill him. He grabbed a knife, snuck up behind his dad and started stabbing him repeatedly in the chest and punching his face to a bloody pulp. He then got some gasoline from the garage and set the road on fire. As he hid in the bushes, he felt a hand on his shoulder. It was large, white and bony. As he looked behind him, he saw the tall, faceless figure again. It wore a black suit. His ears rang again and it went black. That's how Toby Rogers died. 3 weeks later, a news report said 4 people had been murdered. Toby was the key suspect. Police thought he was alive as his body was never found.